Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Rohit Chopra, former head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, also former chair of the FTC, and was one of the people fired by Donald Trump, and as opposed to Doge, as opposed to Russell Vogt. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Let's go. I mean, I feel like we have failed in our job if folks don't have a good sense of what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been doing over the past 10 plus years. But give us a sense of the type of work that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau does or did, and the savings that are going to be implicated going forward for the American public.
Well, it's not that long ago, Sam, that we had a massive financial crisis because regulators were essentially asleep at the switch while predators across the country targeted people with mortgages that set them up to fail. And the result wasn't just homeowners losing their homes, millions of them, but a massive economic crash that led to trillions of dollars of wealth disappearing across the country. And of course, it hit the entire world. So what we needed to do is to make sure that there is some actual law enforcement policing Wall Street and financial companies, not just on mortgages, but on credit cards, on auto loans, on student loans. Look, we know Americans owe more than well over $1 trillion on credit cards, well over $1 trillion on student loans, over $1 trillion on auto loans. And of course, the mortgage market's even bigger. So what's been happening is since that agency was started, it has hauled in over $21 billion just returning that to consumers who were treated by companies like Wells Fargo and Navient, the big student loan company. And Sam, what we're seeing right now is all of those employees, all of those investigators, those inspectors, they've been benched. They have been told to stop all of their work. And that means every single person who's using those financial products, they are now more at risk of getting cheated. This is a bizarre defund the Wall Street police gambit by Elon Musk and the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, which I pronounce as doggy, because it is not doing a damn thing to make our government more adaptable to an economic crisis or a recession, or to have the skills to tackle the problems our economy is facing.
All right, and so the people understand, like there in terms of the financial crisis, as just as an example, the fundamental financial crisis part hit downstream from what started off as selling mortgages, essentially, that were there was no chance for a lot of people to pay off, that don't worry about this. I mean, basically setting people up with, and most people have no financial literacy, frankly. I consider myself one of those people. And then it goes downstream, it gets securitized. It's almost like a multiplying effect of how it provides a systemic risk. So that's where the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau works, like where it faces, obviously, the consumers as opposed to the way this stuff gets traded beyond. But it also has a fundamental support for the mortgage market, is my understanding, too, insofar as coming up with things like what is the average mortgage rate, which, we all just assume because we Google it or something, but that's put out by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and lenders use that as a way to know and for consumers to know that their mortgage conforms to something that would be underwritten by the government. So, I mean, could you just go into some of those details just so we get a sense of what is going to be lost here? And then I want to get into the different phases of how they've attempted to destroy the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau with firings.
It's such a good question because I think people forget we actually do have a whole set of laws on the books to protect homeowners when they take out a mortgage. And in many cases, the lenders themselves, they are freaking out about what is happening in our regulatory agencies because they rely on some of that key data to do and run their own business. So, for example, the laws on the books now forbid a mortgage lender from setting someone up to fail. So the CFPB put into place some guidelines. They were ordered by Congress to give lenders a way to be sure when that they underwrite a loan that it is not going to explode and that they are following the law. The CFPB publishes this data and it is heavily relied upon by the industry. This is the problem with Doggy, is that it is trying to make things not better, but break it. I don't know why someone would want to make our mortgage market less resilient, less competitive, but that's just one of the types of things that is happening. And Sam, let me just share, you know, you mentioned you feel you don't have financial literacy. You know, I think when we board a plane, we expect that it will take off and land safely. When we go into an office building, we go into that elevator expecting it to be safe because there are inspections, there's oversight. We make sure that we have laws and regulations so that people don't need to do so much research before actually boarding a plane or living their life. That's really what the CFPB also does to make sure that those financial products are not toxic, that there is some oversight to make sure that lenders are not lying, to make sure, for example, that your credit report is not filled with errors and inaccuracy. Because when that happens, you are not just susceptible. You may not be susceptible to, bleeding or losing a limb, but your financial life can get ruined, and that can have a big effect on your life.
Can you give some examples of some of the ways that the CFPB has enforced or has basically returned billions of dollars in relief to American consumers? You referred to yourself earlier as basically the police looking at Wall Street and some of these other firms. But people may not know that it's been over $20 billion that have been returned to American consumers. And some folks may have even gotten checks in the mail and not fully know that it was the CFPB that was behind it.
Well, millions of people have gotten those refunds, those checks. And here's just a couple of examples. Just in the past few years, the CFPB, for example, found a number of banks like Wells Fargo, like Atlantic Union, Regions Bank, engaged in all sorts of scams on overdraft fees. Some of you have experienced this. You charge something, you're over your bank account balance by 35 cents. And they charge you $35. But what sometimes we found is that banks were ordering payments and reordering them sometimes so that they could maximize the number of fees they were charging you. Instead of one, you might have gotten hit with 3 or 4 of them. We've even looked at auto lenders. Many of us go to an auto dealer, we get an auto loan, and we found in several of those lenders that they were materially putting erroneous information on your credit reports, including that people had a repossession when they shouldn't have had that at all. So I really think the list of penalties and refunds, it's come from some of the biggest banks on Wall Street, as well as so many of the other mortgage companies, remittance companies, auto loan servicers, student loan companies, and it has added up to tens of billions of dollars. And in many cases, we have really made sure the market is working on competing rather than cheating.
I just want to marinate for a moment on that on the overdraft thing, because it really is incredibly nefarious and clever. If you got $10 in your bank account and you go and you spend something, you charge $2, and then you charge $9. What they'll do is they will wait for that $2 charge and order it so the $9 charge goes through, and you get dinged twice, essentially, or $11 and then the $2 charge, I should say, and you get dinged twice when you would have known already that you were hitting an overdraft if they had done it in order. And so when the CFPB is doing this, it also, you have the first order of impact of like returning money and punishing an entity that's doing it. But it also seems to be obscured how much it inhibits other players in that market from acting in the same way. Once they know there's somebody there to do that, like who would, if the CFPB didn't exist, would these credit, let's say the overdraft fees, or even back when Wells Fargo, I guess it was like in 2015 or 16, was shoving clients into accounts that they didn't start to charge them hidden fees, who would have done that in the absence of that? Like, would it just be a pockmark of agencies and there would be no a real federal authority that was looking over that?
Yeah, what the law says right now is that the CFPB has really an exclusive authority to inspect big banks and a lot of these financial companies operating outside of the bank and credit union world. So I really don't know who is going to do it. I keep hearing that there's someone else doing it, but we've basically gone, since I was fired on February 1st, we haven't had a single enforcement action at all. I mean, basically,
maybe everybody stopped doing the bad things.
Well, I wish that were true. I wish that were true. If all of a sudden people found this new light that they are following all the laws, but you and I know that it is the deterrent effect of policing these markets that has stopped so much of it. And frankly, some of the rules that we have put into place have jump-started a lot more competition. And when we started to go after crime, when it came to overdraft, we saw banks all over the country reform their practices, lower their fees. So that $20 billion is a vast, vast underestimate, a fraction of the benefits to American consumers. You know, Sam, Emma, I really think that people are just trying right now to get by. We are seeing the data that it could be, I'm not trying to predict one, but it could be that a recession is coming. I see for the first time in a while, average FICO score is going down. The number of people paying the minimum on their credit card is at a real high. Subprime auto loan distress is a real problem. Yep. So if there is a real slowdown in the economy and there is a recession, who is going to watch over those mortgage servicers who initiate foreclosures, or those auto loan companies initiating car repossessions? And the list just goes on and on and on. And if there is nobody there, people will really pay the price. And just to be honest, no one voted for this. No one really seemed to campaign on this. In fact, we heard President Trump actually saying, let's cap credit card interest rates. Let's hold these banks accountable. And it seems like we're just getting a complete 180 on that.
Right. I mean, and you mentioned just the increasing financial distress that people are experiencing. I saw the Federal Reserve data says that consumer debt is at an all-time high right now. The average family owes over $100,000. And we have those indicators like what you're saying with the subprime auto payments and how people are more behind on that than they have been in 30 years. My concern is that
we're also on the verge of collection agencies going after about 5 million Americans for student loans.
Right, exactly. Just weeks away from that. And my concern is I'm seeing things like DoorDash just entered into a partnership with Klarna, one of those buy now, pay later companies. Where, okay, if you pay those 4 payments in the installments every 2 weeks, you're not going to get charged interest. But somebody who needs to use installments on their food is likely not to have the money to pay next month to be able to make that payment for the buy now, pay later. This is getting more and more integrated into our economy. It almost has this payday lender quality to it, but it's just like added on to your clothing order or your lunch order. What is your assessment of the promulgation of these kinds of companies, the buy now, pay laters, the Klarnas, the Afterpays, and their impact on this economy that's already so precarious as we just laid out?
Yeah, so Emma, what we have been seeing, and it really accelerated during the pandemic, was tech companies getting more and more into banking and lending. There was a big moment even in 2019 when Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook tried to launch their own currency, essentially a coin that could surveil you wherever you were making purchases, and they could combine that with their advertising technology and know everything and how to price and market to you. And buy now, pay later really took off during the pandemic. And now we see it at checkout on nearly every website. And increasingly, we see it in retail stores, brick and mortar stores where you can pay using buy now, pay later. And the CFPB, when I was director, we did a really major study on this and found that there is such a serious issue with people getting on a treadmill of debt. And I really worry that this, new CFPB, whatever the heck they're doing every day, they're really taking their eye off the ball. We would want these new options to be a competitive offering to help people solve problems. We don't want it to be just a way to induce people into borrowing for something that they can't really afford or that will lead them into financial ruin. So I think that we're going to see more of this. X, Elon Musk's X is inked a deal to create something called X money through Visa. We are seeing all sorts of big tech companies also entering buy now, pay later and payments. And the CFPB is the agency that is supposed to make sure that you are not going to be scammed through this. I'll give you one example, Emma. Buy now, pay later. We heard so many people complain that when they returned the item, there was sometimes issues about whether they were getting a refund on their buy now, pay later loan. When there was an error or a fraudulent charge, there are laws on the books to protect against that, but someone's got to enforce it. And with all of the staff on the sidelines, essentially being paid to not work, this is going to be a mess.
Let's talk about that, because there was a case today. I mean, so and correct me if I'm wrong here in this understanding. Doge comes in, and it is a separate entity and maybe even ideology than Project 2025 under Russell Vogt. Russell Vought is now the acting head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But this dynamic, it seems to me, is happening throughout the government. DOJ comes in, they fire all the probationary workers. Probationary meaning either they're new hires or they've been promoted because they've done such a good job. So they've hired the most successful people at these agencies. And the courts have mostly stopped that. And then Russell Vought comes in and now deploys, and this is what happened at Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They fired like 1,400 of the 1,500 staff, give or take a few, back in February, reinstated. And then Russell Vought comes in and issues a RIF, which is a reduction in force. This is what he's been working on for the past year or two, when he was in Trump in exile, I guess, as it were. And his argument under this RIF order to the court is we can do what Congress has mandated us to do with 10% of the workforce that we had before, literally firing 1,400 people, leaving 100 people at this agency. I would imagine even at 1,500, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau could use another 1,500 people to do all this work. And a 3-panel judge yesterday, one of whom was appointed by Trump, said this doesn't pass the smell test. Give me your sense of just how outlandish this is. It's quite clear that Russell Vought picked a number, 1,400, 90%, and then sort of retconned or backfilled a justification on why a lot of these things don't need to be done.
Well, look, it's obviously, in my view, illegal what they're doing. But right now, everything is on hold. And I think, of course, it's important to not just have investigators, inspectors, others doing this work, but it can't just be enough for them to be on the payroll. They've actually got to be doing stuff. They've got to be identifying wrongdoing and holding people accountable. So even if they don't succeed in a scam to get rid of all the employees, I'm still worried that they're just not going to work to protect consumers fairly. Because here's actually, Sam, what is happening. Over the past 2 months, we have seen a series of cases that are in litigation in courtrooms across the country where the CFPB is just dismissing them. Or in some cases, when they have to respond to a court, they just surrender. And that essentially is pardoning the companies involved in the alleged wrongdoing. And what's even more suspicious is that it's not that they're just doing this to cases that I brought. They're doing it to cases that even my predecessor appointed under Trump's first term brought. And this is raising all sorts of questions. Is there some sort of secret process at the White House or somewhere in government where you can talk to someone and agree to something maybe and get your case totally pulled out of the courtroom or to get your investigation completely shut down? This is a serious problem. Even if we keep people at work, if they are being subjected to some secret process on who they can investigate, or if there's political favoritism, that is just totally wrong and unethical.
And I would be, I think I might have an answer as to the question as to whether that's happening. I have a guess anyways, but lastly, is there an opportunity for civil action, tort action, based upon the failure of the Consumer Financial Protection? Because it may end up that, okay, you cannot fire 1,400 people. that you need to bring us evidence, and they'll come back and they'll say, we want to fire 1,000, and then that will be adjudicated, and then we'll fire 800 and so on. At one point, they'll find, where they can make the case that this many people can be fired. But for these cases that have been dismissed, for cases where, there is statutory and regulatory reasons to believe or violations, that is there a tort action that can happen by consumers to come in and say the CFPB is not doing what they're supposed to be doing by design, I think, from the Trump administration's perspective. But will there be an opportunity for that? Will there be like a round where we'll start to see tort actions on this?
Well, I'm not sure, but here's what I think can go a little bit of the way to help, and that's our state attorneys general. I have been in communication with so many of them who know that they are ramping up now to investigate and go after companies that are cheating people in their financial life. In some cases, consumers can bring those cases themselves or group together to do it, but they are often blocked by fine print in the contract that says they can't bring a lawsuit, even though the bank can sue them. So I think it's an uphill battle. And Sam, maybe there will be places where consumers can vindicate their rights or where states will be able to do it. But so much of the harm are things that maybe people don't even know that is happening to them. We've uncovered situations where an algorithm or artificial intelligence is actually making decisions that are affecting consumers, and they might not even know about it. We went after and resolved a matter with TransUnion, which had completely messed up all of its tenant screening software. And it may have led to disqualifying people from an apartment because of data errors. That's the type of thing that a consumer may not even know is happening to them, but it's a big impact on them.
Rohit Chopra, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And we'll obviously, be tracking this and across other agencies as well. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.